In the previous video, we looked at how to fit replacement side lights on the Nissan Leaf. This video is the next in the series, and we're going to focus on the replacement of the main beam headlights. In some parts of the world, these are called brights or high beam headlights, but I can't go through the whole video using all of the different terms the whole time, so I will call them main beam, and I'll leave you to mentally translate if necessary as we go along. As many owners of the Nissan Leaf will know, the LED dipped beam headlights are really very good, but for some strange reason, Nissan fitted the main beam headlights with standard 65-watt halogen bulbs. In my opinion, this was a foolish move, because not only is the colour temperature of the halogen bulbs wrong, giving them a very strange orange glow alongside the LEDs, but also the brightness of the halogen bulbs is a bit poor by comparison. It also has to be said that fitting halogen bulbs to an electric car is a bit backwards, because halogen bulbs are not exactly the most energy efficient things in the world, but we'll talk about that later. The first and easiest decision we have to make is to find out what style of bulb we need to replace. The main beam headlights in the Leaf use bulb type H9, so that's the starting point for the choice of our replacements. Unlike the side light bulb, which are designed simply to be seen by other drivers, we need to think a bit more carefully about the choice of bulb for the main beam replacement. At the risk of stating the obvious, the main reason for main beam headlights is to throw as much light into the path of your car as you can. The premise of using the main beam headlights is when there are no other drivers in front of you who could be dazzled, and therefore the idea is to see as much and as far as possible. The original halogen headlight bulbs emit light in all directions, and it's the job of the reflector in the headlamp housing to aim that light down the road ahead of the car. Therefore, the beam angle of the LED replacement bulb is going to be very important, because we won't be making any changes to the reflectors in the headlamp units. As we saw in the last video, the light from an LED is not emitted in all directions, and therefore the mounting position of the actual LED chip on the replacement bulb is very important. If the light doesn't either shine directly where we want it, or shine into the reflector at the right angle, then it becomes completely useless. We therefore need to choose carefully. There is a huge variety of LED replacement bulbs on the market, and therefore we have plenty of choice. The actual LED chips used in replacement bulbs also vary very widely. There are some really great modern high brightness LED chips on the market now, but they are expensive, and that's why LED headlights are not a cheap option on new cars. There are, of course, an awful lot of older technology LED chips out there, and those are not suitable for headlights because they're simply not bright enough. It helps to think about this problem from the point of view of the manufacturer. If the LEDs they are using are of good quality and are of the modern high brightness type, they would be expensive. If they're expensive, the manufacturer wouldn't be able to put a lot of them in the product because they'd never be able to charge enough to the end customer to recover their costs. So the bulbs on the market which have a large number of LEDs in them are almost certainly using the cheaper, lower brightness LED chips. So, as a general rule, we can rule those out of our choice. Although it's counterintuitive, the best bulbs are usually the ones that have the smaller number of LED chips in them, because they are often of much higher quality and are therefore a better choice. We also need to choose our replacement bulbs carefully based on the arrangement of the LEDs in the bulb housing. As we mentioned before, we are not going to be changing the reflectors in the car, so we need the LEDs that are arranged on the chassis of the bulb in a way that will shine light onto the reflector in the existing headlamp unit. That way, the light will be aimed down the road ahead of the car to where we need it. Lastly, and perhaps obviously, we want to find some bulbs that are not too expensive. Everybody loves a bargain. Good quality LED bulbs are very energy efficient when compared to filament bulbs, and their power consumption is certainly much lower. LEDs do, however, still generate a lot of heat. If an LED chip is just left to get hot, its life will be shortened and it will soon fail. It is therefore important for a manufacturer to design the bulb so that the heat is conducted away from the LED chip and then dispersed to the surrounding air. Therefore, we are ideally looking for a bulb that has some cooling features built into it. Usually this is in the form of big heat sinks, which are pieces of metal that are arranged to have a large surface area. Sometimes the manufacturers go a stage further, and they include cooling fans to blow air across those heat sinks. To test this theory, as a first attempt I'm going to choose some very inexpensive bulbs, and we'll do this as an experiment to see whether a headlight upgrade can be done without spending a lot of money. The bulbs I chose were from Night Eye, and they were advertised for sale on eBay for just £11.59, meaning that they really are a very low cost option. Taking them out of the box, we can see that they are really nothing special. They have 4 LEDs per side of the chassis, They don't have any visible heat sinks or cooling fans aside from the thin aluminium body of the bulb, and the capsule appears to be made of plastic rather than glass. Putting one of them on the test bench, we can see that they consume about 7.5 watts of power when they're on, and the manufacturer claims that they have the equivalent output of an 80-watt halogen bulb. By comparison, a standard 65-watt halogen bulb consumes more than 8 times this power, but we don't need to get too excited about this because it's really not going to make an enormous difference to anything in the real world, such as the driving range of the car. Just for fun, we might come back and explore those calculations in a future video. So let's fit these bulbs to the car. We start by rotating the access door and the headlamp unit in the same way that we did when changing the side light bulbs. The way that the Nissan Leaf headlamp unit is designed, the side light bulb and its wiring are in the way when we're trying to change the main beam headlight, so we will temporarily remove the side light and set it to one side. With the side light out of the way, you can then reach in and twist the headlamp slightly to unlock it. It will then slide out of the headlamp unit still attached to the wiring harness. To disconnect the bulb, release the locking clip and pull off the connector. Now it was at this point that I discovered a bit of a problem when fitting the new bulb, as you can probably see by the trouble I was having here. The reason for this is due to the keying tab in the connector on the bulb. In a side-by-side comparison with the original halogen bulb, the most obvious difference is that the halogen bulb has 2 keying tabs, whereas the LED replacement bulb has only 1. If you sit and think about this, it obviously doesn't matter, and it shouldn't affect the fitting of the connector onto the bulb. But upon closer inspection I found that the keying tab on the replacement LED bulb was actually slightly longer, and this prevented the connector from going in. In this close-up shot you can see there is a mark in the plastic tab, which was indented when I tried to push the connector onto the bulb. By carefully removing a small sliver of that plastic tab using a sharp chisel, I was able to make the bulbs fit properly. The difference is probably down to poor measurements during the manufacturing process. However, it was quickly fixed. A quick test proves that they are working fine, and the 2 bulbs could then be refitted into the headlamp unit and the cover can be replaced. This process is then repeated for the headlamp on the other side of the car, and, with both sides complete, you should now have main beam headlights that match the colour temperature of the dipped headlamps. The added bonus of using LEDs is that they should be a lot more reliable than halogen bulbs, and will also consume less energy. So let's take the car out for a test drive and see if the new bulbs are any good. I chose a dark country road for the test, because that's arguably where you'd most need to make use of main beam headlights. As you can see, unfortunately the results are not good, and I've added some footage of the original halogen bulbs alongside the new ones for the purposes of comparison. In fact, the new LED bulbs are so bad that it's actually very hard to see when the main beam headlights are on at all. If we look at a section of the footage just after I pass an oncoming car, as I switch the main beam headlights on, you can see a very slight difference in the light levels on the surface of the road just in front of the car, but that's really about it. Anything in the distance is completely invisible, and for a headlight that's considered useless if we're being kind, and downright dangerous if we're being honest. So in summary, I spent £11.59 on some cheap bulbs, and I wanted to find out whether they were any good. The original intention was to fix the colour temperature issue and make them match the cooler white light of the dip beams. Well, I've certainly achieved that, because the colour temperature is now the same. However, the main purpose of a main beam headlight is to enable you to see where you're going, and with the night eye bulbs that I have used here, I have to say that you really can't. So can I recommend them? Well, if you want to make it look the same, go ahead. But if you want to see where you're going, no. In the next video I will repeat this experiment and show what can be achieved by spending a bit more money on a better set of LED bulbs. If you have found this video useful, please remember to like, subscribe, and perhaps also leave me some comments.